Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
Welcome to the MuseCast. We're so glad that you're here. We are happy. It's a happy new year. It's a 2021. It's fresh new beginnings. So many good things. Happy New Year, guys. Hi, Happy New Year, Dan. Happy New Year, Osheta. Did you guys have a good start to the new year? Good start to the new year? I mean, we're kind of in it.
Yeah.
How long do you say Happy New Year?
I say the whole month.
Yeah. How about you, Dan? I feel like Dan is like, I'm done saying Happy New Year. We're moving on. We're down the road.
I am more of a move on kind of guy, so I think your intuition is well founded. I've never been a Happy New Year guy, mostly because I'm not much of a holiday guy. I mostly I like just regular life, you know. Holidays are always a hassle.
Yeah.
It's like I have this routine. You know, you read all these books about developing good habits and developing good routines. Then all of a sudden the government comes along and drops in a holiday to just mess with all of that. And everybody's celebrating. It's like, no, I had a good inertia going here. And now I got to refine my life and rebuild an inertia. And so I'm not much of a holiday guy. However, it's times like, you know, now and, you know, with Advent and learning about Advent and trying to incorporate, you know, those types of Christian themes into my routine, into my inertia. That's been a really new thing that I've kind of incorporated into my life. And largely thanks to Woodland Hills and our new focus on that. I don't know why we're talking about this. Why did we get on this topic? I have no idea.
Because I said Happy New Year.
She said Happy New Year.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I like saying Happy New Year for the whole month of January because I'm a fantastic procrastinator and I still have not figured out my resolutions, my words, none of that. So if I get the whole month to just keep thinking it's like the new year, I get the whole month to figure out what kind of Osheta do I want to be in 2021.
Absolutely.
So that's some high level procrastinating is what that is. So
it's so good.
I know, right?
I love it. I love it so much. Shining bright with that procrastination. I take what you said, Dan, as a challenge accepted. And so probably until 4th of July, I'm going to say Happy New Year to you, just to get you.
All right, bring it
into the hall. No. But yeah, I kind of do that too, Osheta, the procrastination piece. Like the yesterday, I was kind of setting up some stuff. And remember, I told you guys I write things down in my planner, and I have these little sticker thing, this organizational stuff. And I was opening it up and I was putting it in. And I'm like, these dates don't seem to match up. Well, they were for 2020. So I'm like, get behind me, Satan. You are not creeping into my new year. But I had waited. And so when I called the place and they're like, so you're just now figuring this out? And I'm like, well, yeah, I was just putting my stuff together. Back off. I didn't do it early. I'm so sorry. So Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
We're glad that you're here. At Woodland this weekend, we heard from Greg in week 2 of our mini sermon series. And we do that a lot, right? We're in this overarching series, Sermon on the Mount, but we take breaks here and there to address some things and dig in a little bit. And so this is one of those. And so Greg talked to us about purpose-driven suffering. Isn't that just such a glorious title to bring us into the new year? Purpose-driven suffering. So Dan, take it away with our summary.
Yeah. It really is sort of, even though it was, I think technically 2021, was it? Let's see. What is it?
Yeah.
Today? Yeah. So he did that just a couple days ago. Yeah.
Third.
So,
yeah.
I don't even know what year it is anymore. No, he did this, really, it sort of was an encapsulation of what we could take from 2020 because there was so much suffering and not traumatic. I mean, for some people it was very traumatic, but in general, a lot of the suffering that we point to are things like I can't eat at the restaurant I want to eat at and stuff like that. Yeah. But that stuff accumulates too, and it can add to kind of, misery. And so it really was a timely message by Greg, I think. But he really kind of, in a roundabout way, talked about kind of how we should look at our own suffering and our own kind of toil. And what he talked about was what is the purpose of all of this suffering, and why did God create a world where we suffer like we do? And so he kind of looked at Romans 8:28, where it says that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purpose. And Greg really wanted to look at what exactly does that mean? Does that mean that God creates all of this suffering so that he could bring some good out of it? Or is it that we're just going to suffer while we're here and God is going to make the best of it? And of course, Greg argues for the second, which is that in this world, we are going to experience suffering. It's not because God wanted that to happen. It just happens given the nature of creation right now. And that God's role is to help kind of bring something good out of that, but not just God. And this is sort of the crux of Greg's point is he looked at these two different philosophical ideas. Synergeo is the Greek, or monergeo. And synergeo says that there are two energies involved in something. There's a synergy where both of these energies are working together toward a goal. Whereas monergeo is where there's just one energy. And so the question is when we are working, when God brings good out of our suffering, is that monergistic or is it synergistic? Is it just God who does it, or is it something that we both do together? And Greg argues that it's both of us. Now, what that means is that if there is purpose in our suffering, and if the good that's brought out of it is synergistic, that means that we can't just wait around to find out what God's going to do with it. We can't just wait and see, oh, what good is God going to bring from this terrible 2020 that I've had? No, this is a synergistic sort of event. And so that means we have to work with it, with God, to bring that good out. And Greg kind of shared his own kind of some of the suckiness that he's been experiencing. And I really appreciated that, where he just kind of talked about, you know, the sense of loss and the things that he's grieving, that he's losing because of some of his physical issues that he's struggling with right now. And just kind of talking about how, instead of just asking the question, what is God going to do with this to make it good? He's asking the question, what am I going to do to help make this good? How am I going to become more Christ-like in the face of this suffering? How am I going to use these experiences, which I really don't like, to become a person that is more Christ-like? And because that is what Greg wants, is he does want to become more Christ-like. And if God synergistically brings good out of suffering, well, that means that there must be some Christ-likeness that he can find in the midst of this suffering. And so he kind of challenges himself, and of course us, to kind of look at the things that we're struggling with and that is causing us grief or suffering, and ask, you know, how things like this, how can this event solidify my Christ-likeness or solidify my character, or how can I use this to become more of what God wants me to be? And I think that is really the ultimate kind of question that we should ask in every moment, no matter how sucky that moment is how can I use this to make myself more Christ-like, or how can I use this to show the world Christ-likeness?
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. I really, when I heard that we were going to delve into this Romans passage, I was like, good. And there was also at the same time a little bit of like nervousness, because I know that, like many scripture, but I feel like this passage in particular has been used quite a bit, like as kind of like as a Band-Aid, or just kind of like as a bumper sticker, like, you know, when someone's going through some intense suffering or challenges, and I've seen well-meaning believers try to come alongside and say, well, God works all things together for good. And it just can be and has been damaging. And so I really, again, I was excited to see how we would shine a light and delve into that. But I was also a little nervous, because I could imagine that could be triggering for some people who has been said to, not in a malicious way, but just in a way to kind of like, you know what, we don't have to understand it. We just have to know that God works all things together for good. And so I appreciate our church. I appreciate Greg really saying that God didn't cause those things. And we've said that a million times, but I feel like it bears repeating over and again. But he can still work through and in those things because he loves us, not because he caused that damage or that, that horrible thing in our life. And so I appreciated that. I love that he's so vulnerable with what he's going through. And I do think it's, we're all trying to move forward and turn the page and get going on this next phase of our life. I get that. But we can't do that without recognizing that if you look in the rear view, there's a lot of rubble and there is a lot of heartbreak. And it's not just the inconveniences of the pandemic. It's that, which we're all tired of that, but it's also the ripple effect of the horrible things that have happened as a result of the pandemic. But also, you guys, there was a lot of human stuff that happened in 2020 that was really ugly and just kind of bubbled to the surface. And so I am excited to move forward and to trust in what God's doing anew. But I also am recognizing that if I look back at my rear view, there's a lot of stuff there. And so when I think and reflect back on that, that's where I kind of say, okay, God, show me where you were at work. Show me how I was able to come alongside and partner with you. Show me where I didn't see it and I wasn't working in sync with you, so that moving forward, I can do better, or I can be more aware, or what, it's all of those things that swirl around when we dive into a passage like this. So those are some of my thoughts. Osheta, what's going on in your brain when you were hearing the passage and Greg's sermon?
Yeah, I was while Dan was talking, I was like double checking, pull my Bible out to double check, because I just had like an aha moment. I've heard Greg talk about this, like about suffering. I've heard the sermon. I'm deeply committed to synergism, but I think that at the core, so for me, when I'm like, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why can't I figure it out? Who is to blame? There is this, at the core for me, it's this pride of I should figure this out. I need to be able to figure this out and know exactly what's happening. There is this self-sufficiency. And so as you were talking, Dan, Philippians 2:12, we work out our salvation with fear and trembling, came up. And I was like, there is this humility that's required. And I think that's what we saw in Greg when he got really vulnerable. It's this humility that says it's not up to me. I can't figure this out, and I can't even have that anger. It's not that anger that I turn towards God is this deeply why isn't this working the way I want it to work out? Why isn't this working the way it should, whatever the should in my mind is, where that synergy piece is God saying well, actually come alongside and let's first acknowledge that you need me as you're working through this suffering, but then also acknowledge I may have a different way of dealing with this intense suffering, this intense pain that I saw coming down the pike before you even did. And I saw all the different ways of dealing with it. And so Philippians 2 is all about look at Christ and Christ's humility. And even Christ being very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. And so there's this sense of if Jesus can humble himself and work alongside God, even in the midst of Jesus' great suffering, so can we humble ourselves and invite God in and work alongside God. And so it's not this he works out everything, he works all things to our good, as if it's our specific good. He works all things out to our ultimate good that he kind of sees, and we have to invite him into that process. I don't know. I just got totally convicted about man, I think I can figure everything out, and I really can't. Especially when you're in pain, you want to figure things out, and that's maybe one of the most dangerous places we can go when we're in pain, try to figure it out.
Yeah, and I that is so good, and I feel like we need to be able to acknowledge those places and acknowledge that we can't figure it out, and also acknowledge that when we come through it, we won't always know the why. Right? It'd be so great. And I've been so guilty of this. Whenever I've come through a trial or a struggle, to say, okay, I know God was at work, and I immediately want to put the formula together. Oh, so this happened so that God could do this, so that I could do this, so that this would be the outcome. And the reality is we don't always know why. And I think that's a part of the faith and the part of the journey moving forward, at least for me, that I've discovered is I don't get to always know what the formula was or all the how it all fit together sometimes. Eventually, you know, when the fullness comes, I feel like we'll have more answers, but we don't always know. And that is hard for those of us who like to have all of our dots dotted and our T's crossed, our I's dotted and our T's crossed, and have the answers, right? So, Dan, do you really believe Romans 8? Do you really believe this passage? Do you really believe that God works together, brings good, and as we, you know, if we're called according to his purpose, that God will work together to bring all things for his good? Do you really believe that? Like, have you seen that in your life? Spotlight. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. Well, here's the problem with that is that question for me is that, yes, I believe it. And I feel like faith is largely growing more into that belief. I could believe it more, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And what I struggle with that question is that whether I see it or not, that doesn't mean that it's true or not. And I think of like some of these, and this is the image that just has stuck with me since the first time I saw it. But I think of these kids in Haiti and other parts of the world where their whole lives are spent looking for sustenance in garbage heaps. And it's like, you know, I would never expect them to believe Romans 8:28 based on what they've seen in their life, you know, but that doesn't mean that Romans 8:28 isn't true. And I believe that God will bring some amazing good to those little boys and little girls. And so, yes, I believe it, but not because of I've experienced it in my own life, even though I've had a lot of really great things happen in my life and I'm grateful for those things. But that's not what I base my belief on. I believe it because the scripture says it. And I trust that there's something special about scripture as revelation.
Thank you, Dan. Did I cut you off? Sorry.
I just wanted to say one thing to what Osheta said too, is kind of what she was saying about working out our salvation in fear and trembling. And I think echoing what she said is that there's something really important to our humility and I think this is closely related to our humility, is what do we expect? And if we expect all sorts of marvelous miracles and my life is going to be great, and now that God's in my life and I'm holier than I've ever been, therefore I should have better results in my life, and those types of expectations, I think can destroy us. And I think part of the fear and trembling is to live this way and to pursue God without expecting everything to be roses, and because for a lot of people it's not, and it's not. And that's what's so great about the Apostle Paul saying these things when he's in prison and he eventually gets martyred, is that he still believes it regardless of the circumstances that he experiences. And having the right expectation to not expect things that God's never promised, I think is so key to healthy spirituality.
I'm gonna give you a little high five, Dan.
All right.
Good word.
Thank you so much. I have people in my life who that has worked out for them. This faith that shows itself in things working out, situations working out, provision happening, material things being there. Like, that is their means by which they can say, see, God has blessed me. God is real. God has been present in my life. And I always think to, like what you said, Dan, you know, we have kingdom brothers and sisters in Haiti who never see that anywhere near that kind of provision. And yet many of them have this faith that is so beautiful and so pure. And it's not based upon the circumstantial things happening around them, because how could it? And so I absolutely agree. There is a degree where it can be true, even though you don't experience it or see it, right? Like scripture, what God says, God's word can be true, even if you don't experience and see it. But also, I don't think we can be the judge of what others are experiencing and seeing, right? Like, because my faith isn't the same as someone else's faith, and how I feel God meeting my needs isn't going to be the same. To say that God's not meeting someone else's needs because it doesn't look the way I think is a dangerous game that we don't need to play. So,
I
thank you.
Well, sorry, Shawna.
No, I was done.
I keep thinking about the genius of Jesus teaching with everyday and small things to combat that, like, that instinct that we have to quantify our spirituality, to quantify our spiritual growth, to quantify our blessing or favor from God by these external things. And I think Jesus was teaching us something that we need even more now in this moment where we're so deeply tied to our everyday lives and the like small, as I think that we need to cultivate eyes for the small victories and the small moments of peace and the small ways that God shows up, as saying that is God working out, working in the midst of my suffering for my good. God is showing, like, this glorious 30-something degree day where the sun is like getting in my face. Like,
right,
that
beaming
is,
in, like,
right? Like, I think maybe it's like the mystic contemplative in me, but I'm just like, y'all, let's like get to that place where we have eyes to see that, so that we can unlearn the like get your blessing, like, quantify our favor by all these other things, because I think that's what our brothers and sisters who live in constant, persistent suffering or chronic pain, they've had to train themselves to find those small ways that God is showing up. And say, God is in the midst of my suffering. I'm not alone in this. And that is Romans 8:28 in action.
Yes. Girl, Amen. you get the double. Oh, that's so good. Because so like, makes so much sense what we're saying, because if we're only looking for God's presence, proof of his presence when things are going well, what do we do? Where are we left when things aren't going well? When you've had a year like we've had with all the things like I've talked about that are in the rear view, what are you left with?
Yeah.
You have to know, and you have to have a faith that goes beyond circumstances. And I know that can be hard because otherwise, when those circumstances begin to crumble, or they've been ash heap for longer than you care to admit, what are you left with? It's harder in those moments to have that faith if you tie it directly to happy-go-lucky circumstances, or not even just happy-go-lucky, maybe just normal circumstances. Like, he is so much bigger than that. And I love, look for him in the everyday little things. And I think that plays into that habitus piece that we were talking about. Like, when you begin to look for him in the everyday, the mundane, even the ordinary, when you begin to see him, his presence, him at work, and those things, it begins to cultivate this expectation that wherever you find yourself, you will be able to see him there, right? Because he is there with us. Ooh, I love it. Dan, you got a book out.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know how it is. I mean, as soon as somebody says something, that makes me think of something else. And I've done some writing on Romans 6, where Paul says, what shall we say then? Shall we go on sinning so that grace may increase? And so that question is sort of being asked from this perspective that Osheta is speaking against, which is this temptation for us to quantify things. And so this guy who Paul is addressing is quantifying grace. That is, if I sin more, I'll have more grace, as if grace can go up and down. But Paul responds by giving this binary response. No, you're either dead or alive. It's not quantitative, it's qualitative. And I just think that that's another key part of discipleship, is understanding what's quantitative and what's qualitative. Because if you confuse those things, it can cause a lot of spiritual problems, I think.
Yeah, for you and for others, because typically if we hold on to a certain viewpoint or belief, typically we don't just keep that to ourselves, right? We tend to try to push that on other people. And so I think that could be, I think it affects us and it could affect others, and not in a good way. So that brings me to this question that we got asked from one of our MuseCast community members. When Greg was talking about glory, and we've been, all things can work together for good, and it's for God's glory. And so this person was saying it kind of feels like that term God's glory has been used just to kind of excuse or explain away what can't be explained, right? Like when we don't have a reason for the why, like we don't have the backstory, we don't see all the pieces fit together. We just know that something horrible has happened. And so we just say, well, it was all for God's glory. And so this person was saying, that feels very like God's on an ego trip versus God being able to be in the mess with us and bring good out of that. And so let's just, for our community out there, let's just kind of talk about what we mean when we say God's glory. Like when Greg was talking about that in his sermon, how would you guys describe that or define that so people can better grasp?
Yeah, man, that's a great question. Whoever that was, did you have a name for that person?
Yeah, it's Glenn. Hi, Glenn.
Thanks for the question, Glenn. I think your intuition about how we use glory, I think is well founded, because I've experienced this when I was pursuing, my struggling with, can God exist given all of the evil in the world? And when I was pursuing my answers to that, I ran into that a lot. It's like all of this evil is just part of God's glory, and we don't understand it right now. But if we could see it from God's perspective, we would see that it was actually all, great. And where that comes from is it comes from Augustine, who was trying to solve the same problem. And what I appreciate about Augustine, and it's taken me 23 years to say that I appreciate this in Augustine, but what I appreciate in Augustine is that he trusts that God has an answer to this, even though Augustine does not have a good answer for it, but he gives one anyway. But what I appreciate is that he still, trusts that God can work this out. The answer that Augustine gave, I think, is a little bit problematic. He says that if we could see evil and suffering from God's perspective, we would see that it glorified God. And what he uses as an example is, he said, if you were to stand face to face with a painting and your nose was touching the painting, you would probably just see a bunch of blurry splotches, and you'd probably see some black splotches, and you'd look at those black splotches and you might think, boy, that's just ugly and nasty. But if you were to take 5 steps back from that painting and see the whole painting, you would realize that those black splotches were needed in order to give contrast to something beautiful in the picture. And without those black splotches, you wouldn't be able to see the beauty of the thing that it was highlighting. And maybe even this painting is a picture of Christ on the cross, and that glorifies God. And in order for that to work, you need to have those black splotches. And what Augustine said was that evil and suffering is the same way. We right now in the world have our nose up against the painting still. So we don't see the beauty of it because we're too close to it. But when we could see it from God's perspective, we would see that it's actually part of a beautiful tapestry. It's a genius answer. The problem that people have with it, myself included, is that it really sort of says that if we could see it from God's perspective, we would see that evil and suffering is actually good. And that I don't like, is because then it seems like God needs evil and suffering. Yeah. And that is problematic. So whatever answer we come to, I think it has to be something where God doesn't need evil and suffering, but rather he works out of it. It really is, a lot of the evil and suffering we experience, it just is arbitrary, unnecessary suckiness that God is fighting against, not there from God's intention.
Yeah, and who could trust and who wants to love a God who needs evil and suffering in order to be glorified? Like, no, thank you. And unfortunately, I think that's many people's picture of God. And that's why I love the community that we're a part of at Woodland Hills, because we try to tear that picture of God down and bring forth the true picture of God, which is shown through Jesus on the cross. Osheta, I would love for everyone to hear your thoughts about this glory, ego, power hungry versus coming in to meet us where we're at.
So I was thinking a lot about this because we do a little check-in before we start recording about what we want to cover. And I had mentioned that we have to think about what is being glorified in the midst of our suffering, in the same way that we have to look at the word or the concept of glory as what's being magnified, what's being put on display, when the rubber meets the road, what is the actual texture of the thing or the person we're dealing with. And so we think about empire, or we think about what do they glorify? They glorify violence, they glorify greed, so that's what's being put on display. And I think in our suffering, if we think about God's glory, being manifested as we are suffering or in the midst of our suffering. Like what's being put on display is the sacrificial love of God, the agape love of God, like the closeness of God in the midst of our suffering. That's what's being magnified. That's what's being glorified. And it's in that place, like I already said, in that place of like deep humility where we're challenged, where we're like, okay, I need to turn and look into that and see like, where is God really showing up as God's true self? Like, and I think it really does go back to, again, and we always say this at Woodland, but like there's that sun. What is our picture of God, you know? And
I'm like,
and if we believe that God is a power hungry or capricious, you know, God who just like, I love to like trick people and make them feel terrible so I can show up and be like, da, 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 save God.
yeah.
Or do I look like Jesus where I get in the mess with you and I'm vulnerable with you and I suffer alongside you and I grieve with you and then I die for you? Like, if that's who we believe that God is, that's what's being glorified in the midst of our suffering. And I just want to tell like a quick, short little story because I was like thinking a lot about this as Greg was talking. So when Katrina happened and we lost everything, there was this moment where we were in my hometown of Texas City, and like there's this big kind of bridge you kind of go over before you get into my town. And we were like going over this bridge, and I had this prayer, and for me it was one of those like aha moments in the midst of my suffering because we had lost everything. I was 8 months pregnant. We had a 3-year-old or 2 about to turn 3-year-old. Like it was just like so much. And I had this thought. I was like, okay, God, we're going on an adventure. Like I don't know what's happening next, but I know that you're with me. Like I don't have anything, but I have you. And starting that like that process or that journey of being like homeless, being an evacuee from a hurricane, like being separated from the people that I love really quickly without being able to say goodbye, like all these things, starting it with that framework of being like, okay, God, here we go. Like, I didn't expect this. I didn't want this, but we're going to do this together. I think was a prayer that I kept coming back to when things just got harder and harder and harder over the next couple of years of trying to adjust. And so I think that's my offering to our MuseCast community is if you're in deep suffering, maybe embrace a prayer that says, okay, God, we're doing this. Like, this is the worst. I know you didn't cause this. And I know that you love me and you're in the midst of this. So let your love be glorified in this moment. Let's just do this together. You know?
Amen to that. So good. Yeah. When several, and I've shared this before a long time ago, but several years ago, there was a popular devotional book talking about purpose. That's all I'm going to say. But in the very beginning of the book, it talked about God working for good in the midst of your pain, but taking the approach of you don't get to question God about that pain. You have to just accept that he will be glorified in it. And he allowed it for a reason and for a purpose. And that purpose is to bring him glory. And we are just supposed to line up with that. And in that moment, what came flooding in was, the childhood trauma, the crap and the hell that I had gone through. And I thought to myself in that moment, and this is as an adult, someone who had already followed Jesus for a few years. I thought to myself, no, thank you. If God needed that trail of tears really to, and pain to glorify himself, no, thank you. And I literally threw the book across the room. And I just was like, I had like my own little crisis of what in the world? And I am so thankful that God and his beauty and his sovereignty met me in that moment. And I didn't have all the answers, but he met me in that moment and said, absolutely, I did not want that for you. I didn't need that for you to be glorified. I would have done anything for that not to have been your part of your story, but I was with you in it. And so fast forward a few years to where being a part of Woodland and really beginning to envelop myself in this whole Jesus looking God, like this others oriented, this self-sacrificial love that Jesus displayed for us. That's God. That's the picture of God that we need to hold on to. And just the realization that he entered into my pain with me, and experienced alongside me. And the fact that he can bring good out of it, but he absolutely did not cause it or need it for him to be bigger and better and brighter in the world was so, it saved my salvation. It truly did. It saved my salvation. And so I just like to say out there, just know that God does not need, nor does he want your suffering, your pain, your trial to make him big and powerful. That is not what he's about. He's actually broken and hurting when we hurt, and he's broken and he's sorrowful when we're experiencing things that aren't good or aren't pleasant. So yeah, God's glory is being shown in the way in which he meets us. He comes alongside us and he stoops to where we are, not in coming in and saving the day and being big and like, I just hope someone out there hears it if you need it.
Yeah.
So he is with us. He is with us.
That's great.
Dan, do you have any parting words?
Well, yeah, I think I've pretty much covered it, other than just, when obviously as Christians we're supposed to trust God, and I think it matters what we trust God for. And if we trust God that he is holy, then we also have to assume any unholiness we see in the world is not from God. And and that for me has been similar to what you're saying, Shawna, has just given me a confidence in my faith that has kept my heart from just going up and down with the troubles and turmoils of the world. Just knowing that if it's unholy, it's not of God. And in Revelations, when the angels are singing, they're singing holy, holy, holy. They're not singing sovereign, sovereign, sovereign. They're singing holy, holy, holy.
Holy, holy.
Yeah,
that's good. You guys, way to bring it today. That is so good. Holy, holy, holy. And if it's not holy, it's not God. If it doesn't exude his character of love and holiness and others oriented, it's not of him. But he will meet you in that moment and he will carry you through. And so just be encouraged by that. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Glenn, for your question. Yeah. We really enjoyed diving into that a little bit. And we hope to see you next week when we, again, continue the conversation. Be well, everyone. Be blessed.
Take care. Bye.